Between the LG C2 OLED TV and the Samsung QN90B Neo QLED TV, which TV is the right gaming TV for you? Well, that answer is kind of complicated and it's going to depend on a lot of different preferences that you may or may not have for gaming TVs. But when we're talking about overall HDR impact, I think the answer is clear to me, and I'll talk about that and much more related to gaming in this video. Now, this is a really important topic for me because the two TVs in discussion are very similar in terms of their pricing structure, but at the top end, there's a bit more of an advantage going towards the QN90B. So currently at the sale price, there is a $200 difference between the 85-inch QN90B and the 77-inch LG C2, and you can find all of the sale prices in the description below. All of these links are going to be affiliate links, so if you use them, it does help out the channel, so I appreciate you guys if you do use them. But looking at those sale prices, a $200 difference for 8 more inches of size is not a whole lot to ask for. 85 versus 77, I'll take the 85 all day for just $200 more. Now, at the other sizes, it is closer, and you're going to see that they will be probably the same price because they price them competitively against each other. Alright, so now we find ourselves in Elden Ring, and I'll be testing out some examples of HDR impact right here. So you can see when my character is using his sword and you see the magic around it, it is going to be brighter and more impactful on the QN90B. Now, when you're talking about the LG C2, if you look at the site of grace in the background there, that little glowing white light, you can see that the site of grace is going to be brighter on the LG C2. And that's mainly because of the OLED technology, and we got individual self-lit pixels showing off those smaller highlights in the background. On the LCD TV, however, the QN90B, it's not showing up as bright, and that's one of the downsides of a LCD TV. On the flip side, like I mentioned earlier, the HDR impact from the bright highlights are going to come across much better on an LCD TV than on most OLED TVs like an LG C2. At times, it will appear that the LG C2, in comparison to the QN90B, will look dull when it comes to the HDR impact. I feel like the LG C2 does fall flat next to the QN90B, and most of the time when we're talking about the special effects, I would much rather look at the QN90B in this situation. Now flip over here, as you can see, we are in Elden Ring again, and you can look at the brightness level of this tree here. It is much more brighter and more impactful on the QN90B. So again, this drives home the fact that yes, brighter, larger highlights are going to look better on the QN90B. Smaller highlights that are at an advantage on an OLED technology are going to look better on the C2 OLED. So it really depends on what you like more. Brighter games are going to look better on the QN90B. That's just how it is. Daytime games are going to appear brighter and more impactful. Big special effects in darker games are going to look brighter and more impactful. The OLED TVs just can't get as bright as the LCD TVs, and that shows up in the HDR highlights. Now remember, we're only really talking about visuals in this video, but there are different gaming reasons as well to why you should pick a TV, and I did a whole video on that, so make sure you check that after this one. Alright, now moving on to the next big topic with these two TVs, and that's going to be the way that SDR looks. Now, SDR brightness is a big thing for me as I do play a lot of Nintendo Switch. So when I'm looking at these two side by side in SDR, if you guys have watched my videos in the past, you'll know that I cannot recommend a C2 OLED or really any LG OLED for that part for SDR gaming. I do think that you are just going to find better SDR gaming TVs. Now, it really does depend on how much SDR gaming you do for me to factor this in, but I think if you do enough, you should consider it. And the biggest difference here is definitely going to be the overall brightness. As you can see, and as I've demonstrated in the past, SDR is just not great on the LG OLEDs. I don't know why, but they limit the brightness on the LG OLEDs, and you are having no access to the peak brightness setting on LG OLEDs in SDR. when you're talking about playing video games. So that is the big bummer when it comes to the LG C2 is SDR gaming, and until they fix that, I will always recommend any other TV against it for SDR. Alright, so next we're going to look at a couple of screenshots from Forza Horizon 5, and I want you to pay attention to the car and the reflectiveness of the car and the highlights that are on the car itself. Just look at the QN90B presenting the highlight in a much more impactful way. It delivers the HDR highlights in such a manner that C2 cannot. And that's the thing that I always go back to with these two TVs is which one is going to deliver me a better HDR experience. Because for me, that's what I care about at the end of the day. And I think that the QN90B does a much better job with that. When I compared the QN90A to the C1 last year, I saw a lot of the same aspects, but this year the QN90B is better than ever when it comes to trying to be more like an OLED TV. I think that the black levels are fantastic and they get really close to what the C2 can deliver. Except for the C2 can't get to the same brightness level as the QN90B, and the HDR impact is nowhere near as close. Now, the biggest weakness with this TV, again, is probably going to be the night scenes for the QN90B. And then on the flip side, the QN90B, the daytime scenes are incredible, and the C2 is not going to come close to matching the QN90B in the day scenes. So it is a trade-off, and it might be something you want to factor into your decision. What games do you play the most? Are you playing games mostly set in the daytime or nighttime? It is really hard to decide that because honestly, we all play a variety of games, but what are your favorite games at the end of the day? Maybe you do factor that in, maybe you don't. But I will say that if you are a fan of brightness and high impact HDR, the QN90B is probably the one to beat when it comes to just the overall brightness of the TV. Now, the S95B can get close to the QN90B, and I did a comparison of those two when we are gaming, and it was very close. There are still some aspects, though, that the QN90B beats the S95B because overall it is a brighter TV. But there aren't that many games that take advantage of the overall brightness. The S95B, the QN90B, they both beat the C2 pretty clearly when it comes to those highlights, but there are more aspects where the QN90B beats both when it comes to the overall brightness and highlights of the TV. So there you have it. I think that if you're not a competitive gamer, you should definitely consider a LCD TV when you're thinking about gaming, especially one like the QN90B at the high end. Yeah, the only downside with this is going to be, like I mentioned, the night scenes and then also the response time for the pixels. So you'll get a little bit of ghosting compared to an OLED TV, but I think most people wouldn't even really notice it. As long as the TV doesn't have inverse ghosting, which most TVs aren't going to have unless something is done wrong at release, then you should be just fine. And honestly, you probably won't notice most regular ghosting. And I was playing on an LCD TV for gaming for 2 years straight, and then I switched to an OLED TV, and I didn't really notice a difference. Honestly, the only difference is that one is a self-lit pixels, and the other is a very bright LCD. It will boil down to your personal preference. I think, though, if you're buying that 85-inch versus the 77-inch, go with the 85-inch QN90B. 8 more inches for $200. To me, that's just like a no-brainer decision. Alright, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more on the QN90B or any other TV that I talked about in this video, I did a ton of side-by-sides and reviews for all of these TVs, so check them out at the end of this one. If you guys enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing for future videos. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next one.